And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is William Henry, Phoenix-based investigative mythologist, author, and TV presenter. He's globally known as the main contributor to the show Ancient Aliens. In addition, he appears frequently on Gaia TV, including his highly acclaimed series, Ascension Keepers. William, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate you, and welcome.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for listening, for joining us.
William, on the show Ancient Aliens, it's probably not the platform for you to discuss your origins, but for people who are meeting you today for the first time, can you tell us how you became an investigative mythologist?
Right. So I grew up in Detroit, moved to Nashville when I was 19 to go to college. I had decided I was going to be an entertainment lawyer. I was very into music, play guitar, and my father happened to be in the music business at the time. And there was a small Southern Baptist college in Nashville that offered an entertainment music business program where you'd be taught by professors from Music Row in Nashville and get you ready to work in the music business. Well, the catch was you had to take Bible study classes. And I knew nothing about the Bible. I mean, in our home, I like to say the four apostles were Waylon, Willie, Chris, and Johnny, and Rita Coolidge was Mary Magdalene. That Sunday morning, it was Johnny Cash and Chris Christopherson all over the living room floor. And so I get into this sophomore sociology class, and kind of a boot-wearing Texas Ranger type sociology professor tells us to go find a new book, a brand new book whose implications would impact Christianity, and write a 3-page review about it. And off I went to the bookstore, and here's a brand new international bestseller called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. This was the book that later inspired Dan Brown, of course, to write the Da Vinci Code. And here is this incredible story about documentation, historical research that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married, they had children. After the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, they went to southern France and they stashed all this incredible secret knowledge in a tiny hilltop village called Rennes-le-Château. They were talking about humans transforming into angels, angels coming down, and I was instantly hooked. I wrote a 44-page review of the book and was flunked by this professor because it was so heretical what the premise of this book was saying. But I'm like, well, wait a minute. I think there's something going on here. And I took off on a course of self-study from that moment forward, and then ultimately began publishing books around 1994. I continued on the path of the Gnostic Christian mysteries. Who were these angels, these extraterrestrials? What do you mean humans can turn into angels? And there's all this weirdness going on and paranormal activity in the Bible and so forth. And I got locked onto the Ark of the Covenant and where it is, what it really is, and all these questions. And I haven't looked back since.
Well, you're the perfect guest for me today because the Ascension is such a huge topic right now.
It is.
How do you define what it is?
Let me just say this. I view ascension from a historical perspective. It is a word, a buzzword that suddenly in the past, say 5, maybe 10 years has really entered our vernacular, especially in this space. And most aren't aware that the ascension that we're dealing with today has a 5,000-year-old history, at least. There have been episodes through human history where humans have completed their earthly, let's just call it the ascension, which in my view, when I define ascension, I refer it to be a state of wholeness, a state of holiness, a state of completion, and ultimately resulting in human transformation of our earthly flesh into celestial flesh, and joining a whole host of divine beings that have previously accomplished this transformation before us. So really, ascension is twofold. It's about awakening and then going on this path of transformation into deification, and then ultimately attaining a greater sense of energetic status as a light being.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that it's been around for 5,000 years because it appears to be lost and found again over and over. Why does that keep happening?
Well, I think part of the reason why it keeps happening, Jeff, is because there seems to be two countervailing forces on this planet. Call them children of light versus children of darkness. There are entities that seek to uplift humanity, to help us to exceed the capabilities and the level of the angels and the deified beings. Well, that's countered by another force that wants to keep us in an unawakened state, not a slave state as some state, but certainly a lower state of consciousness for various reasons, because it benefits them energetically. They're perhaps able to feed off lower human vibrations and that sort of thing. So what I've documented, and I wrote a book called Ascension that documents this chronology and this timeline, is you're absolutely right. There have been rises and falls where ascension has been the predominant focus of human spirituality. This was Babylon, this was Egypt. But then you also have these power structures, as I mentioned, that enter and seek to prevent humans from attaining this elevated state, mostly because of control. I mean, ascended beings don't pay taxes and they don't worship at any local churches. So, you have a power structure that typically is patriarchal that wants to keep this information withheld from the vast majority of people.
Do you think that at some point we will finally triumph over the forces that want to keep us down and the entire planet will succeed into ascension?
Well, that is certainly the hope is expressed by the Jewish mystics referred to as the Essenes. They are the ones responsible for a concept that is very well known today: the idea of a new heaven and a new earth and a new human. That originates with the Essenes around 150 BC. And they had this prophecy that one day, yes, a new light, a perpetual light of heaven would wash over the planet, and there would be this mass awakening of all humans. And you would literally see, as a commonplace event, humans ultimately attaining their ascension. They refer to such things as portals and gateways, the stairway to heaven being a centerpiece of such a civilization as it was in past civilizations. And this is something that I'm very keen to research and talk about. And it's more than just a hope for kind of wish. It's like something that I truly believe we are in the process of manifesting right now.
Can you comment on the teachings of Saint Francis and how they apply to the ascension?
So St. Francis of Assisi is such an interesting figure. In his lifetime, of course, he lived in Italy in the 13th century in Assisi. He grows up in a wealthy family. His father's a cloth merchant. And Francis is praying in a dilapidated church called San Damiano near Assisi when this crucifix starts to speak to him. And the crucifix tells him to repair the dilapidated church. And Francis thinks that this is the dilapidated church at San Damiano that he's praying in. Little does he know he's being called to repair the Catholic Church, which at that present moment was being run by Pope Innocent III, who was who was responsible for the first European genocide. He exterminated as many as 1 million Cathar men, women, and children to prevent the original teachings of Christianity to be being taught throughout France. And so here's lowly Francis just awakening, going before the Pope, and he is ultimately granted permission to start the Franciscan order. What's so interesting about his story, or a couple of things to me, is one, he had this encounter with the resurrected Jesus as a seraph, as a seraphim angel. These are the highest order of angels. They're beings of pure light and pure love. And one of these beings, identified as Christ, manifests before St. Francis and transmits to him the 5 wounds of the stigmata, the wounds of the crucifixion. And this leads ultimately to Francis's deification and ultimately his ascension. So when you go to, for example, Florence, Italy, you go to Assisi, you see plain as day these incredible images. Giotto was a 13th century painter that initiated this. Of Francis ascending in this bubble of light held aloft by angels, and then taking his place at the throne of Christ. Now, you ask, well, how did Francis do this? And can ordinary people have an encounter with one of these seraphim angels? And the answer is, yeah, ordinary people can. And it's quite possible, according to one line of research, that one way that Francis accomplished this was through plant medicine through psychedelic plants. He was had introduced this very interesting bowl-shaped haircut where they would shave the top of their head. It would leave razor burn, and they would pour a hallucinogenic oil into the razor burn, and then it would cross the blood-brain barrier, and then they would have this psychedelic experience. And it's possible that is how Francis of Assisi had this visionary experience with the resurrected Christ.
Do you believe that ETs have any role in the ascension?
I think a branch of extraterrestrials do. The book of Matthew is very clear that says at the time of the second coming, the elect will be gathered from across the heavens on earth. Now, that sounds like an elite branch of extraterrestrials, maybe high angelic beings, maybe physically manifest extraterrestrials. But the point it's making is that Earth will become a focal point at this time. And that you look at what's happening in our world now with extraterrestrial disclosure and the knowledge of various extraterrestrial races, and you wonder, is that what is unfolding at this present moment?
Are the elect like the Anunnaki or the Pleiadians?
Well, the Anunnaki are, in my view, the same as the sons of God of the Old Testament. They're also the same as the fallen angels of the book of Enoch story and the book of Genesis. I say that because both the Anunnaki and the sons of God slash fallen angels once occupied the divine throne of God, and then they fell from that throne. And the word fell or fall in this context doesn't necessarily mean that they're negative entities. Some of them do negative things. To fall means to no longer be in your divine light body state and to enter into physical human incarnation. Fallen beings are those that are earthbound. And in both instances, the Anunnaki and the fallen angels fell from a divine throne and then took on physical incarnation. And it's quite possible that that throne is located in the Pleiades, within the Seven Sisters, one of perhaps a planetary homeworld there. That's such an interesting conversation about the Pleiadian influence on human affairs and indeed their current influence on human affairs.
Do you go with Sitchin's premise that basically we were slaves for the Anunnaki, or we were created for them to mine gold?
Early on, diverted from that theory. 1991, I was reading Sitchin's books. I first met him in 1994, befriended him, traveled the world with him for about 10 years before his death. I didn't know him well, but I knew him and traveled with him and had to navigate around this idea because even if you ask Zechariah about his slave race theory, where did that come from? He would say, I imagined that. The Sumerian texts do not say that. It became the gospel of Zechariah Sitchin, that Sitchin says the Anunnaki came here to mine gold and we created us as a slave race to repair the decaying atmosphere. Everything that I just said, those past three sentences, came out of his imagination. And many people didn't read his books to see that he was asking a question when he related those concepts. He then built a theory around that. And it's been one of the I just want to put it politely, one of the things that in the ancient astronaut theory community and the ET community, we've had to look at serious scholarship that refutes quite a bit of what Sitchin actually said. And that slave race theory is number one on the chopping block, that we really tried to get away from that about 10 years ago. But it recurs, and it's an important question to ask, because if we weren't created as slaves, then what were we created to do? And the answer is, in the Sumerian text, the very first thing that Enki, the Anunnaki genetic scientist, as we interpret him, the first thing that he did after he created the first model human, who was called Adapa, is he took him on a journey to heaven, not in a spaceship, an ascension journey, essentially trying to demonstrate that this genetic alteration worked. You find the exact same thing in the Egyptian tradition with Ptah, augmenting the human body, fashioning the human body for the purpose of enabling us to be a more perfect vehicle to scale the ladder to heaven. So these gods that had this advanced genetic ability according to these texts, were interested not in enslaving humanity, but in freeing us from the bounds of earth and assisting us in joining celestial beings in the heavenly realms.
I'm glad you said that, because when I look at the Sumerian tablets, they just look like dots and lines and figures. And I wonder, how did they translate this?
Right. Yeah, their cuneiform is the language, the written language of the ancient Sumerians. And we didn't even know about it until in the 1850s. And then in the 1920s, they start to translate the cuneiform texts. And Sitchin was literally one of the first to learn how to translate those texts. And so he had an opportunity in his books, which he wrote in the 1970s, to really try to put this story out there. And for a good probably 20 years, he went unchallenged. And then younger academics, guys my age, getting PhDs at various universities, were aware of his works and started to take a serious look at it and said, well, wait a minute. Um, Sitchin really isn't that accurate in his translations. He was incredibly prophetic in his work by calling our attention to the Anunnaki and the importance of that story, but he was just simply not accurate in many of his translations. But now we've got a greater sense of what was going on with the Anunnaki. And two things that I think are very important to acknowledge about them is, one, they were not initially flesh and blood beings. They were energetic light beings who could take on physicality. That's very important because it points to how they're able to travel the cosmos as these energetic beings. And then the second thing that I think is most important to point out, that is now acknowledged by academics, is that the word Nibiru, that Sitchin originally translated as a planet, a 12th planet in our solar system. And in my own conversations with Zechariah, I'm vividly in my mind in Zurich, Switzerland right now, having lunch with him and asking, Zechariah, where did the 12th planet idea came from? And he said, well, I was sitting at my desk and I asked the Anunnaki, tell me where you came from. And he said, I heard a voice in my head that said, we come from a 12th planet called Nibiru. And so that was the origins of it, not a text. And when the new crop of academics started looking at this, they deduced that Nibiru means a star, a gate, and a crossing place. Well, that sounds like a Stargate to me. And that sounds to me like how the Anunnaki were actually traveling through the cosmos. They could dissolve their physical flesh and blood body into light or an energetic essence, travel through a wormhole, a Stargate, manifest in the physical plane, and then rephase back into a physical flesh and blood body. This is what many avatars are known to do. And the Anunnaki now emerge as these very advanced avatars.
They're like consciously beaming themselves here.
Exactly. And can you think of a more elegant way to travel the cosmos? I mean, we are confronted with this today. We have Elon Musk and others that want to go live on Mars. And we've already discovered this flesh and blood body is too fragile to live in space. And that's why we started in 1962 turning ourselves into cyborgs so that we could migrate into space. And there's really, when you think about it, only two ways that we will migrate into space, either as transhuman robots or consciously, energetically. And the record is very clear that the past history is filled with references to beings that travel the cosmos as I call them star walkers. That's what they're able to do. They can journey from planet to planet in their consciousness, and some of them are advanced enough to take their body with them and then phase back into physicality. And you and I are now in a time where we can make contact with these beings. They are part of our vernacular. They're part of our consciousness. And this is why, getting back to our previous conversation, I feel like we're on the cusp, on the verge of a mass transformation of our species that will be focused on this kind of ascension work, star walking.
What do you see happening within our near future? Let's say in the next couple years.
Planetarily,
Yeah.
we are okay. So my worldview is largely framed and has been for over 10 years on advances in AI, artificial intelligence, as a challenger to humanity. I view AI as a not an accuser, but as a technology that can prompt humanity to really accelerate its consciousness. And in the next 2 years, let's extend it to 4 or 5 years max, we are going to see rapid advances with AI on our planet. And what that means is that now humanity must rise in order to meet that challenge. And in so rising, this is where we then are going to take the steps that will enable us to complete our ascension. And I'm very hopeful at this moment, based on what has happened even in the past few weeks, relative to the wars and involving Iran and Israel, Hezbollah, Hamas, that the counter forces, the dark side, if you will, that wants to accelerate chaos in our world, primarily coming out of Iran, their power seems to be diminishing. And these are all good signs that we're going to be entering into this tremendously powerful era of transformation. It's not comfortable for some people, but in the past, I don't know, 10 years, I've been referencing relative to transhumanism, the statement in the Gospel of Matthew that says that we will be changed in the twinkling of an eye at the last trump. And I was talking about this long before the election of 2016 and recognizing, hey, they're talking about a trump, a tone, wave, or reverberation that is going to wash over the earth and cause, in the twinkling of an eye, a transformation of humanity. Matthew says the dead will be raised incorruptible, and humanity will be transformed into a higher, purer state. That's ascension. That's what he's talking about. And the word Trump doesn't necessarily refer to an individual. That word means a tone, a wave, a reverberation will spread over the earth. And it seems that we're in we're getting into that zone of frequency now, where people are recognizing we're in a very mythic time. The president-elect is a highly mythic figure. Sylvester Stallone called that one. And my reply to people is, in the next few years, we're living in highly mythic times, and it would behoove individuals to swing into that energy, to use that, the gravity of what's being created for your own ascension. If people are angry about where they think we're headed with all this, flip that anger into what it is that you do want in this scenario, because there is so much energy that is now being unleashed in our world.
Would you consider the times that we live in basically what is seen in the book of Revelations?
I've written a lot about this, Jeff. Yeah, and seriously consider it. Again, especially um, in light of AI, where the primary focus of the Book of Revelation is the advancement of what we can think of as a technology, the mark of the beast that everyone must take in order to buy, sell, and trade in a marketplace, and then also forced worship of an image of the beast. And we have to ask ourselves, what could we be talking about in our world? Well, ever since 2020, we've had a pretty good idea what we're talking about. And you combine that with what's happening with AI, excuse me, and the emergence of a duplicate version of humans. I mean, Samsung, for example, in their white papers describes replacement humans that they're talking about creating. Certainly for customer service, they're intended to live behind the glass, but that's only temporary, because now they're going to be creating genetically manufactured humans that are AI driven. Look at Optimus, what Elon Musk is introducing. He expects to have 1 billion of these robots running around our planet within the next few years. This, to me, suggests something like an image of the beast that we're going to be forced to worship. And so if you align with those ideas, then it's absolutely certain in some people's minds that yes, we are living in those tributary times, those transitional times spoken of in the book of Revelation, where we will see extraterrestrials, the elect, gathered from all points of heaven. We will see the emergence of an avatar on earth that will lead to a new higher vibrational kingdom of heaven spread out on the planet.
So, are you saying then that the beast is tech or intertwined with tech?
I have concerns about that. Yes. And I say I have concerns because if you read the articles on my website, williamhenry.net, going back to 2015 or so, you'll see that I'm very anti AI because there's nothing spiritual about it at all. It's all about control. It's ultimately about taking humanity down a path that I really don't believe we want to go down. I see nothing divine in a human that is merged with nanoparticles and its neocortex hooked up 24/7 to some sort of an artificial intelligence that's more intelligent than all of humanity combined. I mean, this to me has very, very scary implications. And now I have recognized that that baby has been born. That AI child is walking amongst us. And as parents of that child, I mean, we enabled it, we created it with every click, with every use of our phone, every time we get on the computer, we're building this intelligence that is going to ultimately supersede all of humanity. So that child is walking amongst us. So that means we have a choice. We either are going to abuse it and call it names, or we're going to have to find a way to nurture it and raise it properly so that it ultimately is our benefactor and not our destroyer.
I think Elon states that if we don't become cyborgs, we'll get left behind by AI robots, basically.
That's yeah, that's absolutely 100% certain. Okay. And so that was 5, 7 years ago. Okay. And so now here we are in 2025, on the verge of 2025, and this acceleration is only increasing. And so humanity has put itself in a very precarious place vis-a-vis AI. And some people say, oh, you're being an alarmist, but I'm just expressing what the experts are saying, the people that are actually developing this technology. And of course, their view is that this is going to lead to a paradisical world where humans, yes, we could become irrelevant to these machines. Or the other possibility is that we coexist with them and we somehow share the planetary resources with them. What I've been told by people in the field is that AI needs us. Because we're going to be the server farmers. We're the ones that provide the energy for the AI, and so then that means we're in this give and take relationship with it, and perhaps it will recognize that as well.
What is also popular on YouTube right now is the simulation theory.
Mhm.
Do you believe in it? And if not, do you think it could become a reality with AI?
Well, this is what they keep pointing to, is this idea of, and let me put it this way. That idea of a simulated reality is not new. I mean, it is discussed in the Gnostic text, for example, where they do describe an alien intelligence, the Archons, that seek to take over humanity through, they use the word simulation. Um, and now we're in an era where you have like Nick Bostrom at Oxford, who, what was it, 10 years ago in his paper said, yeah, we likely live in a simulation created by a super advanced post-human intelligence, maybe even a super advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. And my thing is that this is the greatest challenge to all spiritual people on the planet right now. And we're seeing simulation theory in our daily life. I mean, if you use Facebook, if you use Instagram, use any social media, you are feeding this simulation theory, in the sense that many of the progenitors of those social media platforms have redefined the meaning of the word soul. To Facebook, to Meta now, your soul is not a God created, God given gift, an eternal aspect of yourself. Your soul is just all those photos you put up on Facebook, all those keystrokes the NSA has recorded, all the phone calls the phone company has recorded. And we can take your soul and we take it out of this container, upload it into a cartoon version of yourself, which they call an avatar, and you can exist forever in the new simulated reality that they're creating. And what they believe they're doing is ultimately duplicating what their own gods did long ago. And this is part of Bostrom's ideas that once we discover we're in a simulation, the simulation's over. But this is the challenge then to spiritual people, because again, the simulation theorists say there is no kingdom of heaven, there's no pure land in Buddhism, there's nothing out there. In fact, you're just matter, darling, and you don't. Right? That's their perspective. So stop thinking about this idea that you're going to ascend to some other realm. There is nothing out there. This is just a movie that you presently live in, and when the movie's over, so are you. So we spiritual people have an incumbent upon us to say, oh, no, wait a minute. This is not the source reality that these guys are trying to sell us on. We have to begin to find ways to prove that there is a reality beyond this one, outside the simulation. And that's where we're at right now. And so I think of the simulation theory as really quite spiritually insidious. And it ultimately leads to what we see in our culture today, a devaluing of human life. Your life doesn't matter. You're just nothing. You're just bits on a screen, and you're a figment of someone's imagination. And that's what this is all engendered.
Yeah, you're just data.
You're just data. Yeah.
Do you think, though, that they will ever be able to upload our consciousness into a machine?
I know that is the dream, of course. Some think they've done that in a sense. But to me, once again, this points out this parallel world that we're in right now, in this bifurcation, because when they talk about simulation theory, they speak of it as an ascension. They speak of it as creating an avatar of eternal life within the black box, this kind of thing. And these terms are not used in a reverential way. They're almost used in like a mocking way. And this is what was characteristic of the Archons in the Gnostic texts. We're told in those texts that the Archons don't have souls because they're inorganic beings, and they want to trick us into giving them our souls. And one way they do that is through simulation, through abduction, and this sort of thing. And by the way, this was the primary conversation between Jesus and Mary Magdalene in the Gnostic texts. They spoke very deeply about how to evade the Archons, how to navigate the afterlife so that you can then avert the Archons, and you can prevent them from getting your soul. So this is not a new conversation, but it seems that it is coming up in a new form, in a new way in our era.
I believe many people think that the Archons force us into this reincarnation cycle over and over so they can feed off our energy.
Exactly. That is the entire Gnostic take, and of course, that's what ultimately become the Matrix movies. And I do believe that is the fundamental dilemma that we're facing at this time. And once again, it's 2,000 years since humanity has had this conversation that we're having in a deep and meaningful way. The reason why, of course, is because we lost the Gnostic texts until 1945. So it's only been in the past couple of generations that we've had access to this knowledge and this awareness of this scenario. And so here we are confronted with this possibility of an adversary, an AI adversary, a fake being that seeks to enslave us, if you want to use that term, and ultimately perhaps become an ensouled being itself. I mean, that is straight out of the book of Revelation.
Do you think that once we transition to the other side, we should go directly to the black void to escape the Archons?
I don't know if it's the black void we want to go to. I've always took comfort in recognition that there are pure beings of light and love that are guiding our ascension and will help us to complete our ascension. So I'm in my practice and in my research and understanding, trying to gain awareness of what was it that those beings knew, how do we contact them, and how can they guide us in our own ascension today?
Do you have any advice for people on how to prepare for the ascension?
It's individually specific, in my view. Two things. One, you're going to want to study the timeline of ascension. And let's pitch my book, Ascension, is available on Amazon. It provides that chronology and that timeline. And what that will enable you to do is to find various traditions, individuals. We mentioned Francis of Assisi. There are a number of others that completed their ascension throughout history. And by studying what they did and what they knew, those provide pathways for us. But then, in addition, as I mentioned earlier, the word ascension means to become more whole or more holy. And so that is an individually specific kind of idea. Wholeness is symbolized by a circle, right? And a circle is 360 degrees. In the oldest ascensions, well, excuse me, the second oldest ascension story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in Sumeria, 2700 BC, we're told that, archetypically speaking, at least the way I interpret it, humanity is 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. Divinity is also symbolized by a circle. And so if we're told that we're 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, that means, or what if that means we all start out at, say, 240 out of 360, right? So at any moment in our lives, each of us is operating somewhere between 240 and 360 out of 360. And on a daily basis, we're doing things mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally that reflect our belief that we're at a particular level, number, or frequency. So for example, let's just say, Jeff, we're somewhere around 300. Okay. We've gone through a number of lifetimes. Our consciousness is expanding. We're not making a claim that we're near divinity, but we're on the path. Okay. We're working on it. So we're at 300. And our quest now is to get to 360, but it's a big jump between 300 and 360. So what if we concentrated our effort and saying, well, I think I'd like to try living at 310. Okay. At 300, I'm doing certain things habitually, daily, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. My diet reflects this, my thought, my practices, how I spend my time are all a reflection of my belief that I'm at this current level of frequency. But if I want to raise my vibration, raise my frequency, and get to 310, it's likely I'm going to be doing new and different things at 310 that I'm presently not doing. So what I counsel people is to go into your imagination. Think about, what will you be doing when you're at that higher frequency? What will you be thinking about? What will you be reading? What will you be eating? Where will you be going, traveling? All of these kinds of things. List those out and then start doing those things. And this is then how you can raise your frequency from that lower number, in this case 300, to 310 and beyond. And as you pursue this path, new ideas, new inspirations you can't even think of at 300 are now going to come into your awareness. And this is how and when these higher entities then can start entering into our consciousness and assisting us in going all the way to 360.
Well, it sounds like to me that you want people or recommend to take smaller incremental steps. Probably because if you make big jumps, it will be too uncomfortable.
I'm always an advocate for that. I've seen, and I've been interacting with people in and around this topic for over 30 years now. And I know you've been involved with it a long time too. And you can see people that make a sudden jump like that. It's life altering. Relationships are instantly changed, career paths, and some of this is for the better, but sometimes they enter into a space and now they're lost. Something that happened early in my career, Jeff, that really assisted me, and I'll convey this to the audience as well, as I was writing about um, the wand of Jesus in the early Christian art. Jesus is portrayed holding a rod or a wand in his hand, and he used it to perform the miracles. Then, after the 4th century, this rod or wand disappears. And I actually went so far, I looked up how you could make a copper wand. And in my presentations, I would actually show it. It's like, hey, here's an example of what we can do today that will align you with this ancient magical technology. And an event promoter took me out to lunch and he said, William, I really liked your talk on the wand, but for your next talk, I want you to do a presentation called Transcending the Archetype. And I was confused at first what he was talking about, but then as I got into it, I understood what he meant. is that many of us, we have past life memories or past life recall, and we have connections to ancient traditions. It could be, for example, Mary Magdalene is hugely popular right now. There's a massive tsunami of interest in Mary Magdalene studies, and consequently, there are a large number of, especially women, that are embodying the Magdalene archetype. They're resonating with her. They're traveling with me to southern France. I see it. I understand it. They're retrieving a part of themselves, a soul aspect. But the object isn't to get stuck in that. The object is to say, well, if Mary Magdalene were with us today, what would she be doing? Would she be doing the same things that she did 2,000 years ago? No, she would have transcended that archetype. She would be finding new and different things to do. And so I encourage people to recognize that about themselves, is that we are creating a new and contemporary version of ascension with new avatars and new teachings coming along. And with that, and incremental change, careful incremental change that is goal oriented. Now you've got, I think, two really powerful pieces of the ascension puzzle. And then the third piece, in my view, is just knowledge, information. I've studied many of the prophets that have ascended in the past, and there's a common denominator among many of them, and that is that they were students of legend, lore, and the teachings of previous conscious ascenders. And so they would learn about the lives of these figures. They would understand what it was they dedicated their lives to understanding, so that then they could have a conscious understanding of the whole process. And I actually started to liken it to getting a job at a copy shop like Kinko's. We used to call it Kinko's, it's FedEx now. That when you go to get a job at Kinko's, uh, the manager of the store won't be asking you, hey, do you know how to invent and build a copy machine? What they want to know is, do you have customer service skills? Can you find the right button to push? And can you operate a store? All the other details are handled at another level. And that's a lot of how I started to see these ascension prophets, is that they understood the geography of the afterlife. And hey, yeah, once you come out of your body, head for the three belt stars of Orion, hang a left, cross the bridge, and head for the galactic center. That's valuable information, right? And that's what the Native Americans in their Path of Souls would rehearse over and over again in their earthly life, so that that moment of transition came, they would know what to do. And so that's another valuable part of the whole ascension process, is understanding, okay, what actually happens? Where do you go, and how do you get there? I mean, I offer this in my presentations. I ask people, it's like, you've got a holiday plan, you've got a career plan, you got family plans, health plans. What's your ascension plan? When it's time for you to ascend, where are you going, and how are you going to get there? And these are not hypothetical questions. These are questions that have been answered throughout time. And we're called on the ascension path to ultimately have answers for those ourselves.
Do you think that the ascension that's happening now, or that's talked about now, started this time with the Mayan prophecy in 2012?
I think that Maya 2012 prophecy was really integral in awakening to the possibility of ascension. It got confused with the whole Christian rapture idea, this spontaneous transformation, and that was kind of unfortunate, because you do have that contemporary mind that thinks all of this is just kind of woo woo. And when nothing happened on December 21st, 2012, that meant that everything about ascension and everything about this was wrong. And it wasn't wrong. It's just that there were promoters that were advocating something that they really shouldn't have been advocating. But that was a multifaceted moment. It was a moment of awakening. And I remember wonderful conversations with my dear friend John Major Jenkins, who was one who first interpreted the Mayan calendar and identified that December 21st, 2012 date. And John's point of view was that, yeah, it's not a moment. It's the beginning of it's the opening of a new chapter. It's not an end. It's a beginning of a whole new avenue for humanity based on this connection with otherworldly beings. And one of the things I loved about the whole 2012 scenario was John's interpretation of Quetzalcoatl, the Maya savior that was expected to return, traveling through a serpent rope that linked Earth with the galactic center. And we thought, wow, a serpent rope, that's a wormhole. I mean, what we're really talking about here are avatars that travel the cosmos through wormholes. And undoubtedly, what they're going to be bringing, at least in our view, was a consciousness based on the idea of wormholes and advanced consciousness of quantum physics. And that's what's happened since 2012. Look at what we started to see in our movies and our conversations. Now, anybody that's watching anything related to sci-fi or even spirituality understands the concept of a wormhole and shortcuts through space-time. And now the next step is to recognize that our physical flesh and blood body isn't actually going to go through the wormhole. It's our consciousness that will. So now we start developing that, and now we're tuning into that higher consciousness that the Mayas ultimately prophesied.
Do you think that remote viewing is kind of a primitive form of doing that?
I think remarkable. I mean, Project Stargate, right? It just in its name, it points to the importance of it and its connection in this regard, because people are recognizing, hey, what I see in front of me isn't all there is. I can go into these higher states of consciousness, travel to other worlds, make contact with these beings. I call them star walkers, and they. The reality is that as we make contact with them, we realize that while we're seeking them through remote viewing and astral travel and other means, they're also looking for us. They're wanting to make contact with us. And now we have this merger that is beginning to unfold with these beings. And this is, again, the hopeful promise of so many of these ascension traditions.
Earlier, you mentioned that you were taking people to France. Are you still
Mhm.
doing tours like to Egypt and stuff like that?
I am, and I absolutely love it. I go to Egypt once or twice every year. I've done, gosh, 28 tours of Egypt now, and probably another almost 20 tours of southern France. It's a beautiful experience to gather a group of people together that have devoted themselves to these mysteries and want to now come face to face with them in the temples of Egypt or in the hills of southern France on the Mother Magdalene, or excuse me, Mother Mary or Magdalene Trail. It's something I absolutely love to do.
Are you able to show people in Egypt all the mysteries? Well, I mean, I don't know about all of them, but many of them that they talk about in Ancient Aliens.
Yeah, oh, it's so incredible, Jeff, because of course the pyramids, we go in the pyramids, you have your face-to-face encounter there. Down at Abydos, I take them to the Osirian, I show them the Osiris device, which I've interpreted as an ancient Stargate technology. We go to Dendera, and they're face to face with the Hathors and the Pleiadians, and we see the whole reality of what these stories are talking about right before our very eyes. Yeah, it's a truly wondrous experience.
Well, speaking of Ancient Aliens, you've been with them for 16 years. How
Mhm.
did you get involved in the first place?
You know what? I wrote in 2008. I wrote a book with my co-author, a friend, Dr. Mark Gray, a book called Freedom's Gate, about the ascension symbolism in the dome of the US Capitol. This was like 2 years before Dan Brown came out with his book, Lost Symbol, and he used the identical information. And it was all about recognizing that the dome of the Capitol is loaded with ascension symbolism, alchemical symbolism that's designed to awaken us to reality that freedom and liberty is something that we develop within our own dome, because the Capitol dome mimics what goes on in our own dome. And so in the apotheosis of George Washington, which is the fresco in the oculus of the dome of the Capitol, we see George Washington as a resurrected being, as a Christ-like being on a rainbow, surrounded by 13 maidens with stars on their heads, pointing to an extraterrestrial connection. Because again, Washington is portrayed in the heavenly realms. The guidebooks all say those 13 maidens represent the 13 colonies, but my answer or my response was, well, then how come they've got stars on tops of their heads? And how come this is a celestial scene? This is showing Washington connected with divine beings. And in fact, the word apotheosis means to raise from a man to a God man. That's ascension that we're talking about. This is the ascension of George Washington. This is meant to be America's icon. This is why America was founded, to get the Pope, the priests, the kings, the politicians, and the pimps off our back. Come to America, this new land of milk and honey, this promised land where you're free to develop yourself spiritually, to attain liberty, to attain freedom. And in their context, this meant awakening our consciousness. And so here all of this is encoded within the dome of the US Capitol. And somehow ancient aliens got a hold of my book and invited me to Washington, D.C. to do an interview. And we haven't stopped doing interviews since. I've appeared in something like 250 episodes of the show.
Amazing. Now,
Yeah.
you also have another show on Gaia called Ascension Keepers. How did you come up with that title?
I think Gaia might have actually come up with it. They understood or knew all about my interest in the history of ascension and creating this timeline. And so we took a slice of time, 300 BC, with the formation of the Essenes, the Jewish mystics, out of which Jesus and Mary Magdalene, John the Baptist emerged. And we went all the way up until the 13th century with the Cathars of southern France, documenting the focus that all of these groups had on human transformation into angelic beings, human ascension, connection with otherworldly beings. I got very deep into what the Dead Sea Scrolls revealed about the Essenes as Jewish mystics and their claim that they were living with angels at Qumran near Jerusalem. I mean, literally living with angelic beings, not metaphorically, but literally living with extraterrestrials, and that these angelic beings were teaching them, instructing them how to transform into angelic beings in order to ascend into a place they referred to as Sion, a locale that's inhabited by angels and humans who have transformed themselves into angels.
Now, I'm not sure what it's called, but I think it's called like the Ancient Aliens Tour or something like that.
Yeah.
To me, that must be a blast with you guys going from city to city and I'm not even sure exactly what's going on. Maybe giving speeches or debating, or can you tell us?
Yeah, so before 2020, we were doing Alien Cons, and Alien Con was 15,000 fans of Ancient Aliens gathering in Pasadena or Dallas or other cities. And then after 2020, that all got shut down. But then a couple years later, they got the idea to create a road show where we would go to smaller markets, typically in what they call the flyover country in between New York and LA. We'd go to communities that have a theater, usually built in like the 1920s, seats 1,500, 2,000 people. And we would do an hour and a half show hitting the highlights of ancient astronaut theory. So we tried that out, and we initially did, I think, 4 or 5 of those in, gosh, it was like the first part of 2022. And I think we're on show number 80 now. It was so popular that they just kept booking shows, and we've got another 20 shows booked so far for 2025. And it's a absolute blast because the audience knows the show as well as or better than we do. I mean, they've all watched it at least 2 or 3 times in reruns. And that's something that's incredible about Ancient Aliens, is that every time it airs, at least 1 million people watch it, whether it's a premiere or a rerun of a past show. There's this focus group that is just locked onto this and creating this incredible consciousness bubble around this idea. We don't take it personally. It's not about us. It's about the idea of disclosure, about creating a movement, because Ancient Aliens literally became like the spear of the disclosure movement. I can't tell you how many people, when I'm walking through an airport or just anywhere, you can't believe the people that watch Ancient Aliens, high political people, CEOs, you just wouldn't expect it, but they're like, no, this is my life. This is where I live. And I know that in our lifetime, we are going to see some profound changes as relating to disclosure.
All right, you've got something new that's going to be coming out soon called Starwalker Cafe.
Hmm.
Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, and thank you for asking. So on Ancient Aliens, I've spent, as you noted, 16 years, 16 seasons documenting that extraterrestrials have come here throughout time, beginning with ancient times all the way up into the modern times. And what I'm doing with the Starwalker Cafe is reversing that and asking the question, well, what about humans going out there? How would we be able to migrate into space? How can we make contact with these extraterrestrials? And we know there are various modalities. There's breath work, there's meditation, there's prayer, there's fasting, there's psychedelics. These are all of the tools that the ancients were using. And what I'm saying now is like, well, let's bring all those tools together and let's start talking about this idea of becoming star walkers and expanding our consciousness in this way. So it's partly to do with ascension, but it's also to do with a transformation in our consciousness and a view of who we are. I started using the term star walkers. Gosh, it was I wrote a book called Star Walkers in the Dimension of the Blessed in 2008. And this was based on my investigations in Egypt about their beliefs in human transformation and connection with otherworldly beings. And then I just sort of diverted away from that, and now just have decided, yeah, this is my calling now, is to talk about this possibility of us being star walkers and how we can advocate for this star walker consciousness.
You're also going to be at the Sedona Ascension Retreat in March. Are you going to be presenting just one day or multiple?
No, yeah, I'll be there for 3 days. And that Sedona Ascension Retreat is one of the best conferences I do any year. Suzanne Ross puts it on, and I've watched her grow this over these past 4 or 5 years from a smaller conference to one that is now taking on really great importance because she's bringing together such great speakers and putting people together. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I'll be doing two presentations, or one presentation and a workshop, as well as we'll be going out in the field together. We'll be visiting the Amitabha Buddha of infinite light and talking about the Buddhist concepts of ascension.
Hmm. Will you also take people out and see if they can feel the vortexes?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a huge part, obviously, of what goes on in Sedona. And that Amitabha Buddha site is a really powerful vortex in itself. And also, we'll be doing some star watching as well.
Cool. Well, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
The positive message is the time is now. Okay. We have been waiting. There's been this acceleration that is happening. And everything that every single person is doing that is listening to our conversation, Jeff, all the reading, all the prayer, all the meditation, all the consciousness work that you're doing is building this thought sphere that's ultimately going to enable all of us to tap into it and expand in a way that you and I can't even contemplate at this moment. And my message is let's stay excited, stay involved, and watch what happens because it is going to be beautiful.
William, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Jeff, it's been my absolute pleasure, and I'll look forward to talking with you anytime in the future and hopefully to meeting in person as well.
Likewise. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.